They could freeze to death with weather like this if they're stuck outside at night.
Meteorologists predict tonight will be one of the coldest nights of the year for the Lower Mainland. The freezing temperatures we should expect and what homeless advocates are doing to try to keep our most vulnerable population safe.
My sense is that we want to encourage people to have good behavior.
Calling on the Premier to pull the plug on Peace Arch Park canoodling. The opposition say the problem of people pitching tents is getting worse, not better.
It's definitely tokenism, but it's worse than that. It's a flagrant disregard for us.
A new road near the future St. Paul's Hospital site will be named after someone who was a pillar in Vancouver's Black community. But there's criticism that the city didn't include that community in its decision.
This is the aftermath of a multi-vehicle pileup on the Coquihalla highway from earlier today. The crash left one person dead and more than 30 others injured. It happened just after 9:30 this morning in the northbound lanes near the Highway 3 turnoff close to Othello outside of Hope. Witnesses say at least 20 vehicles were involved, including a police cruiser. The highway was extremely icy and conditions were slippery. 2 people were airlifted to Royal Columbian Hospital in New Westminster in critical condition. 3 others with serious injuries were driven by ambulance to the hospital and are in stable condition. And some of the remaining injured people are being cared for at a warming center in Hope. Mitchell Danilak came in near the end of the crash. He drives a semi-truck with a double trailer and is thankful he wasn't carrying more weight.
Kind of counting my blessings because I only have 36 tons on, whereas normally I haul 45. Lighter than I normally would. And if, I'm just glad I didn't come barreling down the hill. I wasn't loaded heavy. Otherwise, I'd be piled up in the wreckage.
Northbound lanes on the Coquihalla Highway remain closed at this hour. Police are looking to speak with anyone who saw the crash. A rude awakening for people living in a Surrey neighborhood this morning when a truck crashed into their home. It happened at around 7 o'clock on 68A Avenue and 143rd Street. The truck was delivering construction supplies when it somehow rolled away from the driver and slammed into the garage of a new 2-story home. A car was parked inside, and that car was pushed through the wall. There's extensive damage to the house. It's believed 9 people were inside the home at the time of the accident, and luckily none of them were hurt.
We woke up at around 7, I believe, and we heard a big thud. And my mom was in the spice kitchen and she didn't really know what happened. And then we all really just woke up and we thought it was downstairs. And next thing we figured out, we walked outside to see, and we see from the CCTV camera, the truck hit her garage.
A structural engineer was called to the house to assess the damage. The driver was taken to hospital to get checked out.
I can announce today that we're investing almost $15 billion for new public transit projects over the next 8 years.
Canada is ready to spend billions on public transit across the country, but as welcome as the money is, transit supporters say what's needed is better planning.
Perhaps taking some medicine to deal with some issue that they have and they end up going to sleep. They could freeze to death.
Tonight, the Lower Mainland is expected to have some of the coldest temperatures of the year, and that has local homeless advocates extremely concerned for those who may spend the evening sleeping outside.
Well, it's pretty tough. It's been tough. We've been dealing with homelessness for a long time. This just adds to it and just makes it that much more difficult for people.
In New Westminster at the Lookout Housing and Health Society, they've managed to open up 10 additional beds for the cold weather. But Lookout's community engagement manager, David Brown, says it's never enough.
It does get filled up pretty fast, but what we will do, we know of other places, there's shelters in other areas, in other municipalities that we know the people who are there, so we can call there, get them hooked in, we can give them a bus ticket to get them there. Or if need be, we could find some way of getting them a ride to where they got to get to.
Temperatures are dropping quickly in Metro Vancouver. And News 1130 meteorologist Michael Coos says it's the wind that's really bringing in the blast of cold weather.
Overnight tonight, it's definitely going to be the coldest of the year. Temperatures dropping down to -8, -9 degrees. That's only part of the story. The record's -6.7. So we'll get that record, it looks like. But with the winds, that's the big story. Arctic outflow warning is in place, and those winds could could be 40, 50 kilometers per hour, giving us wind chills of minus 15 to minus 25 degrees.
For many of those who work with the Lookout Society, they won't be getting very much sleep tonight as they head out in search of anyone in need.
We have folks that go around, and there's outreach workers and that, and other service providers have workers who walk around and touch base, and if they see somebody and they appear to be street entrenched, disenfranchised, try and hook them in, get them what they need.
Brown says he continues to see people disregard and stigmatize those living on the streets.
We've got to come together, right? I mean, I see so many people saying people choose to live that way. They made a choice, right? They made a decision, they acted on it, and now look at where they are, and it's their fault, and blah, blah. People are losing their lifestyle. People are now, I'm meeting people that up until a little while ago had a pretty good life going for them. As a result of downsizing, right side, whatever the hell you want to call it, they're now coming and knocking on our door.
In New Westminster, Ashley Burr, City News.
It would really just create the conversation, and I think it would help reduce stigma and really just bring people together and understanding that it is okay to feel like this.
While the province of BC has invested millions of dollars in new and existing mental health support for students this school year, a high school student in Richmond says it's still not effective, and she wants more to be done.
BC has 469 new cases of COVID-19 today. Sadly, 6 more people have died in the last 24 hours. 230 people are in hospital, 66 of them in critical care. More than 157,000 British Columbians have been vaccinated. With Family Day weekend approaching, people are encouraged to stay home to help flatten the curve. And spring break is just around the corner. Premier John Horgan is asking people to avoid travel and stay local, and that also goes for anyone thinking of coming to BC for a visit.
If you don't need to be coming to British Columbia, you shouldn't come to British Columbia. We will welcome you when the pandemic has subsided, but you're not welcome today. And it pains me to say that, but the best course of action is for people to stay where they are.
The severity of the pandemic has been highlighted by a new report that says it's 3.5 times more deadly than influenza. The study looked at hospitalizations for the flu in 7 large Canadian hospitals.
They need to close Peace Arch Park on the Washington State side.
You've seen this throughout the pandemic. Canadians crossing to the other side of the border to meet American loved ones. The opposition saying even at this point of the second wave, it's getting worse.
The increase is more on the tent side of things. And I think we've had upwards of 75 tents there last week. And as the weather gets better, as we head into Valentine's Day, those numbers are going to increase. And right now there's very limited enforcement. There's confusion regarding jurisdiction. So at a time when the Premier is asking British Columbians to do more, I'm asking him to do a little bit more, and that's to pick up the phone and try and get this issue solved.
The Premier says these are federal issues, and Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry hasn't flagged this area as a problem.
My sense is that we want to encourage people to have good behavior. And if the people who are coming to from the south to the U.S. side of Peace Arch, and they're meeting with their loved ones for brief visits. I'm reluctant to get in the way of that. If it is a bigger problem than I'm expecting, then I'm sure Dr. Henry will advise and we'll take action.
But the province did close the Canadian side of the park last year, but still, people keep crossing the ditch at Zero Avenue, popping into tents set up on the grass.
The American side remains open, and the American side is actually quite small in space. So what we're asking the Premier to do is to work with Governor Jay Inslee and get the American side of Peace Arch Park closed so we can stop people from congregating in tents, which we're seeing at quite a dramatic fashion right now.
People living nearby are fed up.
We have almost 100 tents parking in this park, and none of them have to quarantine when they cross back over into Canada. And yet if you go just 100 yards down there and you go to the Border Patrol and you go back to Canada, you have to quarantine for 14 days. Yet we have 5 police cars down this Zero Avenue, and they should be given the power to tell these people to quarantine for 14 days.
RCMP patrolling the area say they do remind people of the rules and travel restrictions, but locals say that's not enough.
What's needed is pretty simple. If anyone is entering into Canada, they need to go to customs, just like any other place in Canada. There's no exception here. When border restrictions are in place, you need to go through customs. You can't just use the park. It's crazy what's going on. It's a carnival, and yet government officials simply need to take action in order to solve the problem. They've all turned their back on this.
For City News from Victoria, I'm News 1130's Lisa Usda.
I can announce today that we're investing almost $15 billion for new public transit projects over the next 8 years.
Canadian public transit is getting a shot in the arm with billions of dollars in cash for major transit projects, as well as ongoing funding to help cover the cost of operations.
And because we recognize that communities need predictable funding to be able to effectively plan ahead, this includes a permanent public transit fund of $3 billion a year ongoing, starting in 2026.
The Prime Minister says the money will help with major transit projects like subway expansion or bus electrification, and also be used to give business to Canadian transit manufacturers like Bombardier. The move is being welcomed by big city mayors who have seen the pandemic decimate revenues from transit ridership.
This is a very historic and much welcomed announcement by the City of Toronto and by cities across Canada, because what it now provides is permanent, predictable funding for at least the next 8 years for transit.
That's only part of the equation. I think it is going to be very important that local governments and regional governments and provincial governments also do the strategic planning.
Todd Littman is executive director at the Victoria Transport Policy Institute. He says one of the most important elements is that ongoing transit funding. Littman says local governments often receive one-off payments to help pay for big projects, but not the cash to maintain them or keep them running, a problem that highways don't have.
Because pedestrian improvements, bicycle improvements, and public transit improvements lack reliable funding, so they require a special allocation in most cases. There's huge debates about what turn out to be relatively modest amounts of money compared with what we're spending to subsidize and finance automobile infrastructure.
Now, the Prime Minister is coming in for some criticism over the way this money is structured. While $6 billion is to be spent right away, the rest, including that ongoing funding, won't kick in until after the next federal election, whenever that is. In Ottawa, Shally Lee, City News.
Local politicians are reacting to this morning's funding announcement. Some major transit projects could benefit from this initiative, like the SFU gondola or even the Surrey-Langley SkyTrain expansion. Right now, the route is only funded to Fleetwood, but there's hope this new money can help push it all the way into Langley. Jonathan Cote is chair of the TransLink Mayor's Council, and he's welcoming the funding.
On first blush, it looks like a real positive announcement, but the devil will be in the details. And I think in the coming weeks and months, we'll better understand the program to see if it really fully meets the need.
I am hopeful about it, but I can tell you we'll have to work really hard. We need credible people at the table talking to the federal government, expressing the need. We know the need in Surrey is absolutely great.
Any use of this money for local transit initiatives would need approval by other members of the TransLink Mayor's Council.
We cannot support a move that has gone forward without us and not by us.
Vancouver City Council unanimously voted Wednesday morning to name a new road after the late Nora Hendrix, a pillar in Vancouver's Black community and grandmother to legendary musician Jimi Hendrix. But the Horgan's Alley Society says the city's naming committee didn't involve them in the process.
We are really concerned that the city would actually make a decision like this without consulting the Black community, and specifically without consulting Horgan's Alley Society that has been working with them closely.
Nora Hendrix Way will run between Gore and Thornton Avenues, running north of National Avenue. So that's just around here, the future St. Paul's Hospital site. And the street will serve as a permanent honor in recognition of Nora's role in the Strathcona community.
Well, Nora Hendrix, as you know, is a woman that is highly regarded as a pillar of Horgan's Alley block, we call it, the Horgan's Alley, Strathcona area of Vancouver. So we hold her in extremely high esteem.
Nora Hendrix moved to Vancouver in 1911. She worked as a cook at Vi's Chicken and Steakhouse, a spot visited by musicians like Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. She also helped start the first black church in Strathcona.
After years of holding services in rented halls, Nora was part of the group that worked to get a church of their own.
And the community took this bastion of black belonging and activism in Vancouver and named it the Fountain Chapel.
Names are so important. It is symbolic, but in fact, it imbues something with meaning. And that meaning, if it's not shared by the community that's intended to share and to celebrate, this should have been a day of great joy, of great rejoicing.
Dr. Francis says while she believes the city had good intentions when voting on the Nora Hendrix Way, they need to make good on this issue. Civic Asset Naming Committee co-chair John Atkin and other committee members didn't provide a statement to CityNews before broadcast.
I think they have to wait to implement this and to come back to the Horgan's Alley Society and the black community and ensure that we in fact, are reflected in going forward.
In Vancouver, Kier Junos, CityNews.
Personally, I've never been given any mental health education or any information.
DJ Gill is a grade 10 student in Richmond, and like many other students this year, she's been feeling lonely and isolated, with the COVID-19 pandemic changing the daily routine she's used to.
People I used to see on a daily basis, I barely see them now because of, scheduling. The schedule is really broken up, so it's difficult for a lot of people as well.
The province of BC says it has invested millions of dollars into mental health initiatives since 2017. But Gill says it's just not enough.
I think that they should really be considering how individual students will actually benefit from what they implement.
Gill launched an Instagram account this past December called Teach Mental Health BC and wrote a letter to the Ministry of Education asking for a mental health education course to be implemented.
It would really just create the conversation and I think it would help reduce stigma and really just bring people together and in understanding that it is okay to feel like this.
Gill received an email back from the ministry outlining what she calls ineffective mental health supports.
Creating more ways for students to reach out for help, I don't think that'll really help students. I think really just involuntarily providing information is what will help us and really not give us an opportunity to neglect it if we're taught as the same way we're taught math and English.
In a statement to CityNews, the Ministry of Education says mental well-being is one of the 4 key areas of study required in the physical and health education curriculum and points to a new mental health in school strategy and a website with mental health resources.
I think that it just gets really underweight with PE. It's really physical health education. The class, it's really just targeted on interacting with people, playing sports and stuff. So I think that if it's more targeted, we'll actually get the information that we need.
The Richmond School District also says it's committed to providing social emotional learning and mental health supports to students, families, and educators. The district says recently the Ministry of Education's annual student learning survey taken by students across the province indicated that grade 10 students in Richmond ranked higher than the provincial average when asked if they were learning about mental health.
Currently at my school in particular, the only sort of support mechanism we have is to talk to counselors.
While advocating for a mental health course, Gill shares some advice to peers who may be struggling.
Don't just sulk in your negative feelings by yourself. Talk to someone you trust, talk to one of your family members, do something you enjoy.
In Burnaby, Miranda Fatour, CityNews.
Surrey RCMP say they definitely weren't hamming around when it came to one of their most recent files. Ducky the pig was spotted out and about in Surrey when police were called to bring him in. Mounties released this video on social media. They say Ducky went hog wild and is suspected of trespassing, assault, and attempting to evade police. Police did manage to get him into one of the officers' cars after luring him with their homemade dinner.